Main Street businesses are struggling as they face challenges nothing like we've seen before. You're listening to the Behind Main Street podcast. Let's learn from real-world Main Street entrepreneurs, pick their brains, and learn their secrets to navigate, persevere, and overcome all the modern obstacles they face every day. Get ready to peek behind the stories, the struggles, and strategies of today's Main Street entrepreneurs. Welcome to the Behind Main Street podcast. Here's your host, Chris J. Cardona.
Well, great day, everyone. Welcome to the show. Whether it's your first time listening or an avid follower, thank you so much for joining us. Show notes can be found at www.behindmainstreet.com. But before we get started, I would like to thank the sponsor for this episode.
Today's episode is brought to you by Thinkin' Local, a fundraising and giving-based marketing platform whose mission is to connect local Main Street businesses who care about making an impact in the local community with schools and nonprofits who believe in supporting their local businesses. Find out more by visiting local.com.
Awesome. For today's episode, I'm super excited and honored to interview Brett Kopf. He is the co-founder of an app and company as parents we all love, Remind. And now he has a new company, Omella, who focuses on mission-driven payment solutions for mission-driven organizations. Omella's focus is to make collecting and managing money less frustrating and expensive for organizations that just want to spend their time growing their organization and making an impact. Brett, are you ready to take us behind the curtains and dig into your story?
I'm so ready. I love that intro. It's amazing. I'm fired up.
Awesome. Well, I've given our listeners just a little bit of a sneak peek of who you are. Why don't you tell them a little bit more about yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. So I like to tell people when they ask who I am that I started being an entrepreneur in fifth grade when I was diagnosed with a bunch of learning disabilities, which isn't actually true. I didn't start then, but I was diagnosed with those disabilities. And it sort of propelled me on this struggle for the next 20 years of my life in education to try to find my place in the world. And I ended up, when I was in college, and we'll cover more on this later, starting this education company called Remind.com because I had this teacher that totally changed my life. Her name is Miss Whitefield. I'm still friends with her. And I thought to myself, well, if every kid in the country had their Miss Whitefield, or 10 of them, what does the world look like? And so it somewhat started out of a selfish reason because I wanted to solve my own problem. But I just really like Miss Whitefield and I wanted to help her. And so Remind ended up getting very big. We have 30 million active teachers, students, and parents using it. Over 80% of teachers in the US actively rely on it. They send billions of messages a day, and it's making a real impact. And then most recently, as you mentioned, I started my second company called Omella, Omella, which basically makes it easy for mission-driven organizations, schools, clubs, parent-teacher associations to easily collect money and save money on credit card fees. And then just me as a person, I live in Colorado. I have a young boy, and I am happily married. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, let's go personal a little bit to start the podcast. Tell me something interesting that your family and friends would say about you.
Oh, interesting that they would say. What would be interesting? There's probably two things. One, I used to be a 250-pound offensive guard for football. I played football. And I
Wow.
actually blocked for a former NFL running back named Rashard Mendenhall, who ended up playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, when I say blocked, he was so good that 98% of the time he was like running in front of me and I was doing nothing. But it was pretty cool because every night there was ESPN at the game and it was sort of not my claim to fame. I was just behind the scenes being a role player.
Today, how would you describe your life mission?
If you would have asked me that when I started my first company in 2010, I wouldn't have had an answer for you. And I worked really, really hard. And literally, if I said kill myself, that would be like killing myself working hard. That would be too much of an extreme. But when I finished running my first company, and I'm still on the board of it, I was overweight, unhealthy, super stressed. And I wasn't very happy with that. And also like the time in which I was spending how I was spending my time, I wasn't super happy with that. And so I took some time off after my first company and I thought to myself, like, well, what is a framework for having a good life mean to me? And I did everything from talk to people, to listen, to think, to chat with my wife, to read books. And for me, I came up with this philosophy that's very simple. I don't necessarily believe in goals for myself because I don't want to constantly trying to be achieving something and never enjoy the process in between. So I have three themes. Number one is my health, and that's usually a mixture of physical and mental health. And I'm happy to talk about what that means, but everything from exercise to taking my dog for a walk, to eating pretty well. And that's the first one. The second one is my family, and my most nuclear family, of course, which is my wife and my little baby and dog. But of course, I have two brothers and a mom, et cetera, et cetera. And then the third one is Omella. And I know that might sound crazy, that I don't actually put my wife and kid being number one to some people. But the reason that's the case is because if I'm not healthy and I can't be emotionally present for them and physically, then I can't show up for them. And so that is my philosophy, how I pretty much run my entire life. Because if my house isn't in order, my health and my family, then the third one really doesn't matter. Even though I spend a enormous amount of time on Omella, and it is my sort of like life's mission from a career perspective, and I will spend the next 10 years building it. That is my that is my philosophy.
Wow, that's very, very fascinating to hear, especially for someone that has started a successful startup. Usually, like a lot of times when we follow a lot of people, especially successful people in the startup world, Silicon Valley, they glorify the grind, the hustle, like just, forget the rest. We rest when we sleep and stuff like that. For you to be able to make that realization and make a pivot in your new phase in your new company, that's really refreshing to hear, because a lot of us, like for me myself, having four kids, my wife always my wife and I always have that conversation about like, hey, there's time for just grinding it out, but there's time to kind of readjust and refocus yourself to be able to be prepared to take on that new adventure, new challenge of the day, or whatever the case may be. And being able to take care of yourself and your family and things of that nature, definitely, when you think about it, should be able to come first before you kind of tackle and help the world in that sense.
Yeah, Chris, so it's such a good point. I want to talk about that. I'm not perfect. I don't want to make it seem like I figured out this philosophy and these are the three things that I do all the time. I don't always eat
Mhm.
well. Sometimes I work way too much. And for me, now I'm not suggesting people do this. Like I get up every day at 4:30 in the morning. I'm working by 4:45 or 5, and then by 7 o'clock, whenever my son wakes up, or lately he's woken up at 6, I like to get him ready and hang out with him for a bit. I have the luxury of doing that because I'm an entrepreneur and we work remotely. But I do still work extremely hard, and I am not physically capable of working 17 hours a day, or for my family, I can't do that anymore like I used to, which means that I've had to change things. And it really all comes down to leverage, which you could think of like, if you thought like the image of an old prehistoric, there's like a little lever and then a ball when, you know, probably like 50 million years ago, and they were just figuring out how to use a wheel, like use something to augment yourself. And so in everything that I think about in building the company or like exercising or health, but mostly building our company, because that's what takes an enormous amount of time, I try to think about leverage and tactically what that means, because it's kind of a big abstract statement, usually through people. Meaning, I try to find the people who are extremely good at things that I'm not, and I try to get out of their way. So we just have a really great team, and that provides a huge amount of leverage for me and also for our company. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely makes sense. So my next question to you in line with that is, being a second phase startup founder, what would you say now, with your reshifting of your focus and being able to take a more holistic approach to your new venture, what would you say that people maybe in the past misunderstand about you the most now?
That's another good question. I've never actually thought about that. I don't know what they did or did not understand of me. I know what they do know. I know that if they were to say what type of founder is Brett, everyone hands down would probably say he's the most customer obsessed and customer focused founder that they've ever met. Almost too much. Like one of our big investors once told me that you go unreasonably deep, meaning like I care so much about understanding the core problem. One, because I just care about the type of customer, and two, it helps inform what we should build to solve that problem, that I go very, very deep. That is what I do know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I guess I should ask more people about the question you asked.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we can unpack that a little bit more. Like you said, one of your investors mentioned that to you, that you go really, really deep.
Mhm.
What has that done to help you grow your company? I mean, to like remind to a 30 million, I'm one of the users. I just got, messages from my kids' teachers today using it. So, um, you
Yes.
know, taking that approach of going very, very deep. One of the stories when you interviewed at the chamber that I'm a member of, you were talking
Mhm.
about interviewing like thousands of different teachers one on one, like literally
Yeah.
like 1,800 in a span of a year, from what I remember. So what
Yeah.
has that done for you?
Well, I think first of all, it's just a part of my DNA, and my brother as well. He's my co-founder. We just really like it. We like it. Like it's sort of our craft, and we really enjoy that. But we're not doing it just because we want to go talk to thousands of strangers. I love meeting new people, but like we want to build something that's really impactful and help people and make money doing it. And so, to answer your question, what has talking to all of those customers done? The primary thing it's done is help us identify an acute problem. And you hear this a lot in startup landia, like, are you solving a painkiller or a vitamin? And we want to build something that's a real painkiller, like a real problem for people. The only way that I'm able to do that is if I talk to a lot of people and identify a problem and I listen. I know I'm talking a lot now, but we have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. Usually when I'm talking to customers, I'm doing what's called customer development, which is basically seeking to understand what the problem of the customer is. I listen a lot. And it's now helped inform what we've built. And now we built something that's working. And so, Remind is very big today. It all started with David and I in a bedroom where I had to sleep on an air mattress in the living room because I'm the younger brother. And today it has 30 million people and it's very big. But as crazy as it may sound, like we did it again. Like I'm 30, what am I, 35? He's 37. We started from zero again. And it is a grind. And and not to say it's not exhausting, but we love it because we want to build something that's very impactful.
Absolutely. Well, have you had, the thoughts about what your new company impact in the short term, like let's say in the next 5 years or so? What does that look like for you and for Omella?
Our vision for Omella is to let local organizations get back to leading. And our hypothesis is as follows. We believe that there are millions of schools, parent teacher associations, clubs, nonprofits, soccer teams, millions of these that operate very equally to a SMB, which means a small business, meaning they collect anywhere from 50,000 to sometimes $2 million a year, and they have a lot of complexity in how they collect money, anything from ticket sales to subscriptions to donations and fundraisers. And we believe that if we could help them make them more efficient, save them a ton of money, it will help them spend more time leading or coaching or teaching or preaching. And we ask ourselves, like, well, what does the world look like? So if we just zoom, meaning like, what does the world look like if we succeed at that? If we have millions of those that are using Omella, and so just to give it an analog or a metaphor, because what I just said is somewhat um, more like philosophical. Think about companies like Square or Shopify. These are multi-hundred-billion-dollar companies that are having massively wide and deep impacts on their customer. Usually for Square, it's an SMB, and for Shopify, it's an entrepreneur. And we thought to ourselves, like, well, what if we can create something as valuable as Shopify or Square, but for our audience, because they don't need Shopify or Square, they have different problems. What does the world look like? And so that's what we want to do. We want to create something that's very impactful and big, but also make money doing it. That is aligned with our customers from a financial standpoint.
Fantastic. Well, talking about big money there, um, I'm curious if tomorrow you woke up and you had $100 million that you didn't have to pay for in the bank, how would you spend it on?
My bank or my personal bank or my company's bank?
Your personal bank.
Uh, I mean, that's a lot of money. I would first want to know how to get it into a lot of FDIC insured accounts. I couldn't fathom how to manage that amount of money for my personal self. But what would I do for my personal self? I can honestly say I wouldn't change too much. Um, I wouldn't get a new car. We have a Toyota Sienna and a Subaru. Um, I wouldn't really change much. I probably might get a mountain bike. Like I've wanted a mountain bike for a long time, but that's it. Honestly, the bigger thing I would be worried about is if I inherited that amount of capital, it's like, how would I manage it? It would take up an enormous amount of my time to figure out how to steward it. And I don't want to be spending my time doing that. So one day, maybe like if we were worth that, great, wonderful, wonderful scenario if that happens. But that would only happen if we've spent so much time focusing on what we're doing now, which is what we really love. So I don't think much would change other than the mountain bike. And I should
There you
say,
go.
like, like if when we're traveling, we usually stay at like the good hotel, not like the very, very fancy hotel. Maybe we'd stay at a little bit nicer hotel every now and then. But other than that, I don't think much would change.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned that you started your company before and even your new one with your brother. What was your childhood like growing up?
It was great. We really hit the jackpot with our parents. Sadly, my dad has passed since, so he's not here, but my mom's still here and she's wonderful. Um, but I think my brother and I have talked about that before. Is like, how did we get so lucky? And we don't actually have an answer for that. We really hit the jackpot, but like, how do they do such a good job raising us? And I think the answer is that they just gave us unconditional love and support. And we grew up in this really great environment where they exposed us to all these things. So I'm originally from Chicago, and they just cared about us. Like they just really loved and cared about us. And it was great. So that was one part. And then the other part was the environment in which we grew up in, like going to camp, playing sports. Sports had an enormous impact on who we are. Like part of our values of my first company, Remind, is to find a way, meaning like you just find a way to solve the problem. Excuses are just not an option. And that came from football because I didn't have any discipline before I played. And my coach was kind of a hard ass, excuse the French if you're listening. But I knew that he really cared. And he was quite aggressive with us, but he cared. And a lot of that translated into those values, into who we are as people today. I was going to say his name is Mark Agofsky. He's a real person from Niles West High School. Is one of the best teachers that I've ever had.
Oh, shout out.
Shout out. Thanks, Mark.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, when when you were a kid, did you have a dream career or a job? I know you took agricultural engineering, something to that effect, right? And
Yeah,
then,
good.
but you didn't really use that in your startup ventures.
Yeah, I studied agricultural economics, and it's funny to say the word economics because I failed at it. I didn't understand what the concept of price elasticity was, or supply and demand, which is very important. I went through five majors in college. I got denied from the business school, and I don't blame them for that. Michigan State's a great school. I wasn't the type of person that they profiled for at that school. They usually in the business school, and it's a great school, but they teach you how to go work in the workforce that 99% of people do for a big Fortune 500 company. And that wasn't my path. And so I had to hit a lot of walls and fail. So I actually started my first company. It was called Social Bonfire when I was a sophomore in college. And I remember it was a consulting company. And there was a customer who said, great, I'll pay you 150 bucks an hour for 20 hours a week. And my jaw hit the floor. I was like, oh my God, is this humanly possible? And that's sort of what started me out on this path of like being an entrepreneur, which I guess is a part of my identity from a career perspective.
When you were in school, when you were a kid, were you like, did you actually like school at all? I mean, I know that you had some, you were diagnosed with ADD, dyslexia and stuff like that. How did that impact your, if your teacher, Mrs. Whitefield, never helped you, how was that growing up? If you didn't have her,
It would have, I'm skeptical that I would have gotten to Michigan State. I don't know what I would have done. Like I probably would have went to a fine school. The thing is, like, I think an important point I want to make is if you say, why was she so good? And I'm sure everyone listening to this has had a teacher or a mentor of some sort that has had a huge impact. It is not that she taught me the functional lesson of how to add or how to subtract or how to be a better writer. She taught me all those things, but I don't remember any of them. She taught me how to be a good person. She still instilled a set of value systems and she believed in me. And that's actually what I needed the most. And my mom too, like she was a huge part of that. But that they believed in me, that instilled confidence. I was like, oh, I do have a place in the world and I can apply it somewhere. That that is what I think is actually not often is spoken about more broadly in the education system. And it's been a big part of what I've been focused on in my career with Remind is wanting to enable these millions of educators and help them because everyone just needs someone to believe in them. And she believed in me. Now, I don't actually think I answered your question though, did I?
no, it's right in line with it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, when you were when you were a child growing up, having the great influence of Mrs. Whitefield in your life, and like you mentioned earlier, um, if you didn't have if you didn't have her, you probably would have still been successful in life. Maybe not as successful as you would have had because you had that, not just her, but your mom and your parents and your family just kind of loved you and pushed
Mhm.
you into being the person that who you are today. Was there, if you think back to it, was there something in your childhood that when you think about it, you felt sort of led you to exactly the point that you are today, that you're so passionate about being really a missionary? A lot of startups are very mercenary like, like that's
Mhm.
that's just capitalistic, that's important, but you're very mission driven in all both companies that you've done, and the
Mhm.
life that you're leading. What,
Mhm.
what was that, if you can think back to it?
Yeah. I don't know if there is a single point. I think it's just a part of who I am. And one of the reasons is I know and believe that is because in 2015, one of our investors suggested that I take a personality test, like it's called a 360, and it's called Tilt 365. Highly recommend people to do it. I think they have personal ones and it costs $40. And they do everything from interview your executive team to your best friend to the people that report to you, to report under you. And they have this 50-page report based on research and data, both quant and qualitative, on who you are as a person. And it just blew my mind because I felt like I was reading a book about myself, my strengths and my weaknesses. It's like a map. It's like a legend for who you are as a person. Which, by the way, I don't think is often, people don't spend enough time on understanding who they are, because the better they know that, the more they could focus on their gifts and not focus on their weaknesses, which is my belief. One of the things that it said was that for me, I am, it used the term humanitarian. Like, I really care about having broad and deep impact and helping people. It just so happens that my vehicle to do that happens to be a startup company, because I also like building products that people like, because I think it's the most scalable way to help people. And so, to answer your question, to close it out, there was no initial like switch. I think it was just kind of who I was, and with a mixture of people like Miss Whitefield or my mom or even my brothers growing up, like that sort of like directed me down this path.
That makes sense. Well, now that we got into your story a little bit more, let's go deeper.
Let's take this conversation behind the alleys and go deeper.
Solutions for Main Street entrepreneurs and organizations mean to you?
I think it really helps them. And in the beginning, they like that I am connected to it because I talk to them all the time. Like, I text my customers all the time when they have issues. We talk every week. We're on phone conversations, and I'm listening to what problems they have. That only lasts for so long, though. So, like, Remind has 30 million users. There's going to be a point where I can humanly not answer every support ticket for our company. My job then becomes extracting myself and hiring people who are better. So today, I would say 99% of people that use Remind have no idea who I am, and that's okay. Like, they're just living their lives, and they happen to rely on this software that hopefully saves them time, or gets them more connected to their teacher, or helps the kid with their education, or the parent gets more engaged, which is wonderful. They don't really care who I am, and I'm okay with that. Like, I have my nuclear group of family and friends who they care who I am, and that does matter to me. And I care that I'm spending my time doing things that I think is providing impact for the world. But they probably don't know who I am, and that's okay.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you for unpacking that for us. When you were a child, you mentioned when you were sophomore, you said in college you started your first venture, social Bonfire. Oh,
Mhm.
what was it that kind of put entrepreneurship on your radar as a child? Growing up in sports, like loving family and all that stuff. What was it that kind of triggered you, or like put that entrepreneur bug in you?
Well, I think the unconscious component is seeing my mom and dad work. So my dad was a stockbroker. He owned a discount brokerage company. So what that means for anyone who is not older like me, or even older, back in the 90s and 2000s, if you wanted to buy $10 of McDonald's or Starbucks, you had to call a firm and they had to execute on a trade. Today, you go to E-Trade or Robinhood and click a button. But he was the one that they executed, and they took a percentage off. And we saw him get up at 4:30 in the morning and grind and work very hard and do well. Like, he had a middle to upper class income, and we did great. And I just saw that every day. And then my mom was a therapist, and she's extremely empathetic. And so I would see her work really hard and basically be an entrepreneur herself. And so I didn't know it at the time, even by the time I got to college, that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But when I hit a sophomore year, what propelled me to start my company was actually out of being so frustrated with the education system and feeling not smart and insecure about myself because I wasn't doing well. Like the system was just banging me in the head and I just couldn't get a win. And I basically said, I was like, all right, well, I'm either going to drop out and do who knows what or start something. And I took the start something path. And that sort of led me on the path over the last 15 years to where I am today.
Wow. Was there, someone specific, like an entrepreneur influence that you kind of had in your life?
No one specific necessarily, but by the time I got to college, I would just find anyone who would talk to me. I literally would knock on the door of local coffee shops and say, "What do you do?" I would stop at the local Barnes and Noble and read books on startups, which didn't exist then, by the way. All they had is like accounting for dummies, which, if you know anything about starting a company, it is important that you understand the it is important that you understand basics of finance and business models and margins. But like accounting isn't actually what's most critical. Like you could probably hire an accountant who's really good to help you with that. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was so passionate about solving it once I sort of got a taste of the idea of building something that helps people.
I see. I see. Well, you were a founder, CEO of Remind for a good amount of your adulthood, right? What was that journey like, taking your vision from what you and your brother had in mind to be able to realize it to today 30 million users, billions of people using it on a, like messages being sent on a day-to-day basis. How was that journey like?
It was unbelievable. I mean, just to put it into context, we spent 2 years banging our heads against a wall in Chicago. My brother had a full time job. I was running another company on the side. When I say a company, I don't even think we were incorporated, hardly made any money. And by logic, we should have failed over and over again, but we refused to because we believed in it so much. And oftentimes, when you think about starting a company, it comes down to just having the sheer tenacity to not die. And we just refused to die. And so to see it grow up and become this thing that impacts millions of people in a very broad and deep way, it's amazing. Like the best thing, by the way, is when you talk to someone like you, and we just met, I think, 4 days ago. Just so happens that you use it with all your kids in your school. It's like, that's awesome. It's very cool that you're using something that just came from a kernel in our brain, my brother and I's brain, and now it's being used by you every day. And like you were a stranger, you're no longer now, but you're using it and it's helping you. It's a really cool feeling. And for a while, by the way, I felt a bit of imposter syndrome because we were in the valley, two kids from Chicago. I don't have like an MIT graduate degree. I'm not a rocket scientist, but I will outwork all of them. I work very hard, and it took us a little bit of growing up because the company was growing so fast. Like we were adding 300,000 users a day, and we had to hire a bunch of people every quarter. And we had to learn all these terms that we didn't understand, and it was just trial by fire. But we found a way to sort of persevere through it because we really cared.
Wow. What did you what made you decide into moving into a new venture in your next phase of your life?
Well, the initial catalyst was that at Remind, I saw that over the 10 years of building it, the biggest problem that these teachers would have is trying to collect money. Like they would try to collect money and mom and dad, like they would send a text out and Remind makes it easy for teachers to communicate with students. For anyone who doesn't know, remind.com, you could send out a message saying, hey, you have a quiz coming up or do you need help in an exam? And it will blast out to 10, 50, 100, or 10,000 people in half a second. And it's safe and it encrypts everything and it makes it easy. Excuse me, it doesn't encrypt it. It makes it safe by anonymizing who the teacher and who the parent is. And I kept seeing that they kept trying to do that. And mom and dad would physically put a check in their kid's backpack. And half the kids would forget it. And then the teachers had stacks of thousands of dollars on there. And so I just took a step back and I thought, well, if you and I were to go to lunch, I would Venmo you $10. Why does that not exist for education? And that started it. And we refused to sort of let it go. And we validated that was a hypothesis. We validated that hypothesis by talking to thousands of customers.
Wow. And what were some of the challenges that you faced when, you're coming from a VC backed company and then you're coming into starting from scratch again,
Mhm.
and building something, grinding out like you mentioned. How is that, because you were able to kind of take your company like literally like just not fly, not like really really fast, but really just kind of take it for years, like you said, almost like more than a decade, right? Now you're having to start something new without the VC backing that you had before. How does that like how does that make you feel? How does that journey been like? Or what are you getting? How are you doing that?
Yeah, it's hard and it's better, but hard in different ways. Starting the second company,
Mhm.
you think, "Oh, I'm a two-time entrepreneur, not going to make the same mistakes." We did. We've made mistakes. It's just like inevitable and a part of the story. We have raised capital. We just haven't announced it, and we haven't raised nearly as much money. And one of the big differences for
Mhm.
Remind, we didn't charge from day one, which I don't suggest people do, but for our company at the time, that was right. And with Omella, from the single first transaction, we have made money, which I'm really proud of, and we've also saved our customers a bunch of money. And so we run the business quite thoughtfully. We manage our cash flow and our burn quite thoughtfully. And we also make investments where we need to, specifically in building product, and talking to customers and spending the time to do that. We have a very long term view. Like, we're thinking about building this company. When we started it in 2000 and late 2019, it's like, well, what do we want to spend the next decade of our career on? Like, and so what? We're 2.5 or 3 years in, and I would be skeptical if we stopped even in the next 7 years. Like, we really want to build something that is impactful and lasts a long time.
Wow. What did you wish that you knew prior to becoming an entrepreneur? Either, from social Bonfire to Remind 101, Remind, and Omella.
I probably would have told myself to not sacrifice my health in the beginning, because that far outlasts the company. And the other thing, which I'm quite embarrassed by, but I'll share it. My wife is amazing, and we've been together for 10 years. But when we first started dating, I pretty much straight up told her, I was like, you're important to me, and I want to be with you, and I have to figure out how to make this company work. Which means that sometimes, like, I prioritize the company over her, which I regret doing, and that's a really icky thing to actually say publicly. But you live and you learn, and I only realized in retrospect. And now what I know is, like, I want to be building Omella forever, but someday Omella is going to come and go. Hopefully, it's going to be in a really long time for no, but she's not. And so that is actually goes right back to the framework from the beginning of the podcast, is like how I think about health, her or slash my family, and then the company.
That's very, very impactful. Definitely, if you think about it in that sense, it kind of, like you mentioned earlier, you sort of reprioritize your goals and your whole perspective in life to be able to take on, all of these new things that you're coming up with, and the next phase of your life, essentially.
Because I was going to say, like, one day, maybe if I'm fortunate enough to have 4 kids, the life's going to slap me in the face. Like, you have to totally reframe your goals and like your objectives, because it's just not working anymore. And I welcome that slap. It's going to happen.
Yeah, well, it happens every time you have one kid. You add one other one. Like your whole dynamic of your life changes, and then as they grow up, like I didn't like all the stuff. Now that I have a teenager, like in almost finished with freshman high school, going to sophomore, and thinking about college, like your perspective is changing. And then we have a little one that's not yet, or maybe about a year and a half shy of going into kindergarten. So that's,
Mhm.
it kind of puts your perspective completely different, and you have to deal with those two separate perspectives at the same time. So it definitely is a life experience, a changing life experience.
Yeah, I believe it. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, if you could have just one superpower, what would it be? But before you answer that, let's take a quick break.
Today's episode is brought to you by Thinkin' Local, a fundraising and giving-based marketing platform whose mission is to connect local Main Street businesses who care about making an impact in the local community with schools and nonprofits who believe in supporting their local businesses. Find out more by visiting local.com. And we're back, digging for gold on the Behind Main Street podcast.
So, Brett, if you could have that one superpower, what would it be?
You're not going to like my answer to that. I'm actually quite content with who I am and who I am not. So I will just preface that. I mean, I'm not a lot of things, by the way, and I'm aware of that. With that said, if I could wave a wand, I would probably want to dunk. I've been playing basketball since I was in 5th grade. I love it. I play 3 times a week. It is my true form of freedom, because it's the time when I stop thinking and I just am in the present. And I would love to be able to dunk and also just play at a higher level. But I'm only so good, and I'm 6'1" and like reasonably athletic, but not that great. But I would like to dunk.
That would be nice. I tried to dunk when I was in high school when I could still play. I tried to dunk. I didn't make it. Like how it is, you forcefully try to dunk it and hit the edge of that ring, and you fall
What's the
down,
worst?
and you fall down on your tailbone, and you can't walk for
Of
like a
course.
week. So yeah, and I'm nowhere near nowhere near 6 foot tall. So I had no business even trying. Well, in your opinion, what would you say is the most crucial personality trait that any entrepreneur needs to have to succeed, or at least have a semblance of success?
There's multiple ways to skin a cat, and there's so many different types of entrepreneurs. I know entrepreneurs who never talk to customers and build very successful large businesses. That's just not my way. I like talking to customers. So, um, the most important one to me would be resourcefulness to find a way to get things done. Like, there's just so many times when you start a company when you're just backs up against the wall, someone quits, or like you have to let someone go, or like revenue slowing down, and you just have to find a way to not fail. And I think a lot of that just comes from either failing a lot because I failed a lot leading up to it, or personality. I think a lot of it can be taught. Like a lot of it actually, I think relates back to football. Even like there are so many values that I didn't realize were being taught to me as a kid that I learned in football.
If you could make, throughout your successful career, um if you could make one mistake over again, what would you say that would be, and would you, or how would you do things differently?
So for mine, I actually think it was right that we just focused on growth because we were growing so quickly. But I just wish we would have started to charge sooner because it's just really hard to build a product that a lot of people like. When I say a lot of people, so there's nothing wrong with having a local coffee shop and supporting local community members if that's what you want. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. What I wanted was to build something that impacted millions of people. And it's very hard to build something that impacts millions of people, raise a bunch of money, hire a bunch of people who are smarter than you, and figure out a business model that has positive unit economics. It just takes time. And so I wish I would have done that a little bit earlier. And by the way, so I learned that lesson and I did it with Omella. That's why we made money from day one.
Wow, fascinating. um Nowadays, having the life experience, you working have an opportunity to work with your brother again. Is he
Mhm.
that someone that you turn to when you sort of feel stuck? Do you kind of work that out with your co-founder, or do you guys turn to someone else when you guys both feel stuck?
No, like we have each other, and it's really helpful because there's this innate deep trust where neither side is going to screw each other. We also understand who we are quite well. Like I know the type of person he is. He's unbelievably intelligent, very pragmatic, very logical. Where I, on the other hand, tend to not be nearly as logical, and I'm a bit more empathetic. And especially like when we face hard business problems, we hash it out and we talk about it, and it's helpful. Like when you don't have to go through whatever your metaphorical example is, like go through the jail alone, or like go through something really really difficult alone. It's helpful to have someone be in, excuse the French, but the shithole with you because a lot of it's really hard. Like a lot of it's just hard building something from scratch. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm having a rough day, and I tell my wife, "I was like, all right, time to make something from nothing. Let's go," because you're building something from nothing.
Does it make a difference, because you have your wife? Sometimes my wife, we talk about that. There's some things, even if she's your partner in life, you almost have a partner in business. Like for you, that I would imagine that would be your brother. There's some things that your brother just understands about you and the way you operate your business, that sometimes your family, it's a little bit hard for them to grasp, like what is it that you're going through when you're having those times when you really need that, like, that extra support, or extra, whatever the case may be. But your brother would understand something like that, or your partner in that case that you've built a second company with.
Yeah, I think he does understand. Even though, to give my wife credit, she's been. I mean, I started dating her when I was sleeping in an air mattress in the living room, and we had no one using Remind at all. So she's seen it from nothing to, where we are today. And she probably understands me better than anyone. She knows who I am, and she could also call me on my BS better than anyone because we have like a very direct foundational relationship where it's quote safe for her to do that, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, today, what drives you to just keep going at it and really, like, just going through it when the times do get tough?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is like when you actually build something that a few people like, and we have a few customers that love it. it's so nice to talk to them and see all the ways they're using it and how it's helping them. Like the amount of time we save them and the amount of money that we've saved them on fees and software fees and credit card fees, it's really impacting them. That's one. The second thing is I have a vision, and I should say, our company, like our team, we have a vision for building this impactful thing. And the concept of getting it to the scale of Remind with this product, meaning, if we have millions of local organizations and small businesses using it, like the impact that can have, we think is really powerful. And I will my way on the world with it. Like I will find a way to bring it to the world because I just want it to exist because I think it will help them.
Wow. What has been, you would say, your biggest aha moment, throughout these two ventures that you've done, or three?
And every time I talk to a customer, I learn something new. And I've talked to thousands. Like you just learn something totally new. And it's like, oh, I never thought of that. And that's why I enjoyed so much. It's sort of like you uncover this kernel of information. It's so fascinating. And again, of course, selfishly, that informs what we should build and decide how to prioritize what to build.
Wow, absolutely. Well, if you could talk to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give him?
I'd probably tell you what my dad told me when I was 21, in which he said, all work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy, which of course he didn't quote. It's a very common quote. I was blind to understand what he meant at the time because I was so ambitious, and I'm still very ambitious, but we talked about the framework for life. And I wish I would have spent a little more time just like having fun and whatever I wanted to do, like travel a little bit, but I don't regret any of it because if I did not do those things, and the company wouldn't have had been where it is today. And I was able to travel later. But that statement that he said had informed how I think now. And I've still worked very hard, but I also took my kid for an hour and a half walk this afternoon at 5:30 or 6 because I wanted to be with him and also give my wife a break. And that was fun. That was a good message that he sent me.
Wow, that is wonderful for all of us. And as an entrepreneur who's super busy, what is your favorite productivity hack?
Okay, so people actually think I'm very busy, and I am busy. However, in this phase of the company, I usually don't have a very busy calendar. I give myself more space, and I somehow find a way every day to do things that are very leveraged and impactful. That's number one. Like, I don't want people to think like you should just fill your calendar up. I'm spending time doing things that I think provide impact. Um, but you asked for a productivity hack. I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, for me, I use Apple Notes. I organize my to do list, and every day I organize my to do list and I focus on the top three strategic themes of the company. Because usually, like my job is the founder, and eventually I'll say CEO. I'm the CEO now, technically, but we have 10 people, so it's nothing. But it's to focus on things that only I can focus on. And whether that's like raising capital or being very customer focused or culture, those are the things that I spend my time on. But back to your question, Apple Notes, three top things, and I try to relentlessly focus on those.
Wonderful. And you have some time on your calendar. Don't overpack it, like most of us
Yeah,
try to do.
yeah. And trust me, working out is in there. Like in the middle of the day, I have to exercise.
Wonderful. Well, can you recommend three books for our audience that has helped you build two successful companies?
Oh boy, three books. So one book that really had an impact on me in college was The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. I don't know if it actually related to building companies, but it really impacted who I was as a person. The general philosophy is just thinking about happiness and in general, like zooming out from that, asking the question of what does it mean to have a good life. So that was one. What would is it cheating if I look at my book list because I have a
No,
favorite book
absolutely
list?
not.
Um, okay, ask the other question, and I'm going to pull it up meanwhile, and then we can come back to that question. Okay, because there are
For
some
sure,
ones
for
that have
sure.
like an outsized impact on me.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, my next question was, what are you most looking forward to your future now as an entrepreneur?
I want to build something that gets to a very big scale, both from a customer perspective, but also financially. Like I want to build a very big business, and I'm very excited by that. And supporting that business is a very healthy culture of great people that's very transparent that are aligned on achieving the mission that we're focused on. That is what I'm excited about. Ray Dalio has a book called Principles. Ray
Oh,
Dalio
yeah.
started one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, and I really liked it because such a good writer and he advocates to have a philosophy for life. And he actually doesn't tell you to have his philosophy. He just says, have a philosophy for life. And so it was really good. It was helpful to read that because it sort of elevated my thinking and understanding what a framework was and how to like navigate this world. That was another one that I really liked. I'm sure I'll think of more as time goes on.
He's such a great teacher. Like, I love watching his my older brother in Singapore always turns me into his videos when he has those cartoons when he explains like, like recession, when it's gonna be like every 10 years a recession. Like it makes you think like long term instead of being scared. Oh, like there's a pandemic, there's a recession happening, the whole world is gonna go crazy and we're all gonna, like not eat anymore or whatever. But when you look at his things, like, oh no, just it's just part of a cycle. And he
Yeah.
walks through it. He's like, it's so good. When I love listening to his videos or watching his videos on YouTube. It's like I get so much from every time I watch it. Where can listeners learn more about you and Omella?
They can go to my website, brettkopf.com, BRETTKOPF.com, or visit Omella, OMELLA.com. Happy to chat if anyone's interested in using it. We are growing and would love to support you.
Well, in closing, what is one piece of practical advice that you can share with our listeners in their journey of entrepreneurship?
Spend time to be healthy, because if you don't have that, then you'll never be able to be a founder.
Wow. Thank you so much, Brett, for that advice and being such a great guest on the show and for giving me and our listeners actionable nuggets that we can apply to our business and life. I invite our listeners to please connect with Brett from Omella. I will have his information on the description of this episode. I urge you all to do connect with me. Also, if you would like to be a guest on the podcast or would you like to suggest a guest, also, please do share, subscribe, leave a rating, review. I would very much appreciate your honest feedback, which helps me continually provide impactful content that I hope you all will find valuable. And always remember that every day that we face adversity, think of it as an opportunity to find the gold inside you. Until next time, have a success-filled day, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Behind Main Street podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Remember to visit www.behindmainstreet.com.